My name is Olivia Carter. I am 35 years old, and 3 days after my younger sister's wedding, my parents called me begging for $38,000. Not because they needed help with a medical emergency. Not because they were losing their home. Not because someone was sick. They called because the wedding bill had arrived. The same wedding they told me I wasn't welcome to attend. The same wedding I helped make possible. The same wedding where my own mother looked me in the eye and said, "You're not invited." If that sounds unbelievable, trust me. I spent years convincing myself I was imagining the signs. Years telling myself there had to be another explanation. Years believing that if I just tried harder, gave more, sacrificed more, eventually my family would treat me the way they treated Madison. I was wrong. Looking back now, I think the story really began 8 months before the wedding. It was a rainy Thursday evening in Seattle. I had just finished a 12-hour workday and was halfway through reheating leftover pasta when my phone lit up with a FaceTime request. Madison Carter. My younger sister. 28 years old. Beautiful, charming, outgoing, and the unquestioned center of our parents' universe. I smiled when I answered. Despite everything that would happen later, I loved my sister. At least I thought I did. Madison appeared on screen practically glowing. A large diamond ring sparkled on her finger. "Olivia," she screamed. He proposed. Behind her, I could see our mother, Susan Carter, hovering nearby with tears in her eyes. "Logan asked me last night." Madison held up her hand again. "Look at this ring." I laughed. "It's gorgeous." "Congratulations." And I meant it. I really did. Logan Reed seemed like a decent guy. Successful. Kind. Responsible. Everything you would want for your little sister. "We're getting married next spring." Madison bounced excitedly. "Mom is already planning everything." Susan stepped into frame. "It's going to be beautiful." She smiled. "A real family celebration." Those words would haunt me later. A real family celebration. At the time, I thought I was included in that sentence. I should have known better. 2 weeks later, Susan called me directly. Not Madison. Susan. Whenever my mother called instead of texting, it usually meant she wanted something. "Honey, I need a favor." There it was. The favor. I leaned back in my office chair. "What kind of favor?" Susan sighed dramatically. "Wedding vendors are impossible these days. Everyone wants deposits, guarantees, contracts. That sounds normal. The problem is credit requirements." Her voice softened. "Your father and I don't really qualify after the refinancing situation." That was true. My parents had made several questionable financial decisions over the years. Nothing catastrophic. Just enough to create complications. "What exactly are you asking?" I already knew. "We need someone responsible to sign the vendor agreements." I closed my eyes briefly. "Of course." "How much?" Silence. Never a good sign. "Around 40,000 total." My eyes opened immediately. $40,000? Not your money. Susan rushed to reassure me. "Just your name. Just your excellent credit. Everything gets paid after the wedding." I stared out the window at the Seattle skyline. Rationally, I knew this was a bad idea. Emotionally, it felt impossible to refuse. Growing up, I had always been the reliable daughter. The responsible daughter. The daughter who fixed problems. When Madison needed help, I helped. When my parents struggled, I helped. That role became so deeply embedded in my identity that saying no felt unnatural. "Send me the paperwork." Susan sounded relieved immediately. "I knew I could count on you." That sentence followed me my entire life. I knew I could count on you. What nobody ever said was whether I could count on them. Over the next month, Contracts arrived one after another. Venue. Catering. Photography. Floral design. Every document carried my name. My signature. My financial responsibility. The total eventually settled around $38,000. I signed everything. Not because I was careless. Because I trusted my family. Or maybe because I desperately wanted to believe they trusted me too. As wedding planning accelerated, something strange began happening. I noticed small gaps. Small exclusions. Small reminders that I occupied a different category than Madison. She mentioned bridesmaid dress shopping during a casual phone call. I hadn't been invited. She talked about a weekend venue tour. Nobody mentioned it beforehand. Photos appeared on social media showing family planning dinners I knew nothing about. Every time I noticed, I found an excuse. They're busy. They're stressed. Wedding planning is chaotic. Then came the group chat. I discovered it completely by accident. Madison forwarded me a screenshot intended for someone else. At the top of the image, I could clearly see the title. Wedding Dream Team. 11 participants. My name wasn't one of them. I stared at the screenshot for several seconds. Then I called her. Hey, quick question. Sure. What's Wedding Dream Team? Silence. Brief, but noticeable. Oh, just a planning chat. Everyone's in it? Mostly. Am I? Another pause. I thought Mom added you. She changed the subject immediately afterward. At the time, I let her. Looking back, that conversation should have told me everything. But hope is a powerful thing. Especially when it's attached to family. I kept believing there had to be a reasonable explanation. I kept believing I was overthinking things. I kept believing that when the wedding finally arrived, everything would make sense. I had no idea I was spending thousands of dollars and months of emotional energy preparing for an event I was never supposed to attend. The strange feeling continued growing over the next several months. Not dramatically. Not in ways that would make a reasonable person immediately panic. Instead, it arrived through small moments. Tiny exclusions. Little reminders that I existed somewhere outside the circle everyone else seemed to occupy naturally. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Wedding planning is stressful. People get busy. Details fall through the cracks. That explanation worked for a while. Then the rehearsal dinner happened. I found out about it through Instagram. One Friday evening, I was scrolling through social media after work when Madison posted a series of photos. She stood in a beautiful white sundress beside Logan. My parents were there. Logan's parents were there. Several bridesmaids smiled around a long restaurant table covered with flowers and wine glasses. The caption read, "Perfect night with the people who matter most." I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Nobody had mentioned a rehearsal dinner. Nobody had invited me. Nobody had even told me it existed. I picked up my phone and called Madison immediately. She answered on the fourth ring. Hey, Olivia. She sounded distracted. Music played in the background. Laughter. Glasses clinking. Looks like you're having fun. Oh. Her voice changed slightly. You saw the pictures. The rehearsal dinner? A brief silence followed. Yeah. I didn't know there was a rehearsal dinner. It was kind of last minute. Another excuse. Another explanation that somehow never applied to anyone else. Mom didn't mention it. Things had just been crazy. Madison lowered her voice. You know how wedding planning is. The truth was, I didn't. I had never been married. But I knew enough to recognize when someone was avoiding a conversation. We ended the call less than 2 minutes later. Afterward, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the dark television screen. Rationally, I understood that a rehearsal dinner was not the end of the world. Emotionally, it felt like another piece of a pattern I was trying very hard not to see. A week later, I called my mother directly. "Mom, is there anything else I should know about?" "What do you mean?" Susan asked. "Wedding events. Schedules. Plans. Everything's under control." "Okay, but I need details if I'm flying across the country." "Honey, stop worrying. Just show up and enjoy yourself." "Show up and enjoy yourself." The phrase sounded harmless. Looking back, it was probably the most honest thing she said the entire year. Because that was the only role she ever intended for me. Show up. Pay for things. Stay quiet. Don't ask questions. A month before the wedding, I still had not received an invitation. That fact bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Every other family member seemed to know exactly where they were sitting, what they were wearing, and what role they would play. Meanwhile, I knew almost nothing. Finally, I called Madison again. "Hey, quick question." "Sure. When are invitations going out?" She laughed. "Olivia, you're my sister." "I know. You don't need an invitation." The answer should have reassured me. Instead, it somehow made me feel worse. Because technically she was right. Sisters do not need invitations. Sisters are automatically included. Sisters belong. At least they're supposed to. 2 weeks before the wedding, I booked my flight. Seattle to Nashville with a connection in Denver. Nearly 19 hours of total travel time. The ticket cost over $1,300. Then came the hotel reservation. 4 nights at the nicest hotel within reasonable driving distance of the venue. Another $700. Add the wedding gift, rental car, meals, and travel expenses, and I was approaching $3,000 before the ceremony even happened. Not once did I consider canceling. Not once did I consider staying home. Because despite everything, I still wanted to believe this wedding represented a chance. A chance to reconnect. A chance to feel included. A chance to be part of my family again. 3 days before my departure, I called Susan one last time. "What time should I arrive?" "The ceremony starts at 2. Should I come earlier?" A pause. "Why?" The question caught me off guard. 4 pictures. Family time. Helping out. Everything's already handled. "Okay." Another silence. Then Susan added, "Just come at 2. The conversation lasted less than 60 seconds. After hanging up, I sat in my office staring at my phone. Something felt wrong. Deeply wrong. Yet every time I tried to identify exactly what it was, my brain supplied another excuse. "They're stressed. They're busy. You're overthinking." The night before my flight, I packed carefully. The navy dress hung perfectly in the closet. The wedding gift sat wrapped on the kitchen table. I even spent an hour working on a toast I hoped to give during the reception. A short speech about Madison. About growing up together. About family. Reading those words now would probably make me laugh. At the time, they made me cry. Because despite everything, I still loved them. That was the hardest part. The people capable of hurting you most are usually the people you spend the longest time trying to understand. The next morning, I boarded my flight carrying hope I probably should have abandoned years earlier. Somewhere over Colorado, while staring out the airplane window, I opened my notes app and reread the toast. I imagined the reception. I imagined laughing with relatives. I imagined my mother introducing me proudly as her eldest daughter. I imagined my father pulling me into a hug. I imagined Madison thanking me for everything I had done. Looking back, I wasn't flying to a wedding. I was flying toward a fantasy. And in less than 72 hours, that fantasy was about to collapse in front of everyone. The flight landed in Nashville just after 7 in the evening. By the time I collected my luggage, picked up the rental car, and started driving toward Ashford County. Darkness had already settled across the Tennessee countryside. The roads became narrower the farther I traveled. Familiar places appeared one after another. The gas station where my father used to buy lottery tickets. The diner where my family ate breakfast after church. The old football field where Madison had been crowned homecoming queen during her senior year. Every landmark carried a memory. Every memory carried a question. Why had everything become so distant? I checked into the Hampton Grove Inn around 10 o'clock. The hotel was small but clean. The woman at the front desk smiled politely when she saw my reservation. "Here for the Reed wedding?" she asked. I smiled back. "Yes. The whole town's talking about it." She handed me my room key. "Sounds like it's going to be beautiful." I thanked her and carried my bags upstairs. The room felt strangely quiet. Maybe because after 19 hours of travel, I expected someone from my family to call. Maybe because I thought there would be excitement. A message. A welcome. Something. Instead, there was silence. I unpacked slowly. The navy dress went into the closet. The wedding gift sat carefully on the desk. My phone remained silent. Finally, I texted Madison. "Just checked into the hotel. Can't wait to see everyone tomorrow." The message showed delivered almost immediately. No response. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Then an hour. Eventually, I received a text. Not from Madison. From Susan. "Ceremony starts at 2 o'clock. That was it. 4 words. No safe travels. No glad you're here. No see you tomorrow. I stared at the screen for several seconds before placing the phone face down on the nightstand. Something inside me felt unsettled. Not hurt exactly. Not yet. More like a warning signal my brain refused to fully process. The next morning, I woke early despite the exhaustion. Sunlight streamed through the hotel curtains. For a few moments, everything felt normal. Then I remembered where I was. Why I was there. The feeling returned immediately. I spent most of the morning getting ready. Hair appointment at 10. Makeup at 11. Back to the hotel by noon. While getting dressed, I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to feel excited. Tried to remember why I had come. Madison was my sister. Whatever frustrations existed between us, this was still one of the biggest days of her life. That mattered. At least it mattered to me. Around 1 o'clock, I wrapped the wedding gift one final time and headed toward the venue. Meadow Ridge Estate sat on several acres of rolling countryside just outside town. White fencing stretched across green hills. Elegant floral arrangements lined the entrance. Luxury vehicles filled the parking lot. The entire property looked like something from a wedding magazine. As I parked my rental car, I felt a small surge of relief. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe all the awkwardness leading up to the wedding was simply stress. Maybe once everyone saw me, things would feel normal again. I grabbed the gift and started walking. Guests moved toward the main entrance in groups. Laughter drifted through the warm afternoon air. Somewhere in the distance, musicians were tuning instruments. Everything looked perfect. Then I saw my father. Richard Carter stood near the entrance wearing a charcoal suit. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Relief flooded through me. Finally. Someone I knew. Someone who would make this feel less strange. I lifted my hand to wave. My father immediately looked away. Not distracted. Not preoccupied. Deliberately away. Then he turned around and disappeared inside the venue. I stopped walking. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but it left a strange feeling behind. My father had seen me. There was no question about that. Yet he hadn't waved. Hadn't smiled. Hadn't even acknowledged my presence. Before I could think too much about it, the venue doors opened again. My mother stepped outside. Susan looked elegant in a pale blue dress. Her hair was perfectly styled. Makeup flawless. From a distance, she looked like the picture-perfect mother of the bride. Then I noticed her expression. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't happy to see me. She looked tense. Very tense. Susan walked directly toward me. Not welcoming. Not excited. Purposeful. The closer she got, the more nervous she appeared. Finally, she stopped a few feet away. Olivia. Hi, Mom. I smiled uncertainly. You look beautiful. She ignored the compliment. What are you doing here? The question hit me so unexpectedly that I actually laughed. What do you mean? Why are you here? The smile disappeared from my face. For Madison's wedding. Susan glanced nervously toward the venue entrance. Several guests walked past us. She waited until they were out of earshot. Then she lowered her voice. Olivia, you need to leave. Every sound around me seemed to disappear. What? You shouldn't be here. I stared at her. Certain I had misunderstood. Certain there had to be another explanation. Mom, I flew across the country. Please. Her voice became sharper. Don't make this difficult. My grip tightened around the gift box. I don't understand. Susan looked directly into my eyes. Then she delivered the sentence that would change everything. You're not invited to this wedding. For a moment, I genuinely thought she was joking. It was the only explanation that made sense. Then I saw her face. There was no joke. No misunderstanding. No confusion. Just certainty. Cold, absolute certainty. Behind her, the venue doors opened again. A sophisticated woman in her 60s stepped outside. Elegant jewelry. Designer dress. Confident smile. Logan's mother. Charlotte Reed. She looked between us curiously. Susan, is everything all right? My mother froze. For one brief second, real panic crossed her face. Then she smiled. A completely different smile than the one she'd shown me. Warm. Polished. Effortless. Everything's fine. Charlotte glanced toward me. And who is this? The silence that followed felt endless. Because somewhere deep inside, before Susan even answered, I already knew I wasn't going to like what came next. Charlotte Reed smiled politely while waiting for an answer. It was a simple question. Who is this? Under normal circumstances, my mother would have answered immediately. Instead, Susan hesitated. Only for a second. But a second was long enough. Long enough for me to notice. Long enough for me to feel something cold settle in my stomach. This is Olivia, Susan finally said. Charlotte continued smiling. And? Another pause. Susan glanced at me before looking back at Charlotte. An old family acquaintance. The words landed harder than being told I wasn't invited. For a moment, I genuinely forgot how to breathe. Family acquaintance. Not daughter. Not family. Not even relative. Family acquaintance. Charlotte nodded politely, apparently unaware of what had just happened. Lovely to meet you. She extended her hand. I shook it automatically. My mind was still trying to process what my mother had just said. Family acquaintance. 35 years of existence reduced to 2 words. Charlotte excused herself moments later and disappeared back inside the venue. The second she left, my mother's pleasant expression vanished. You need to go. I stared at her. Did you just call me a family acquaintance? Susan crossed her arms. That isn't important right now. Not important? My voice cracked slightly. Mom, who exactly do you think I am? She looked around nervously. More guests were arriving. The ceremony would begin soon. Please don't do this here. Do what? I asked. Ask why you just pretended I don't belong to this family. Olivia. Her tone sharpened. You're making a scene. The accusation stunned me. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even moving. Yet somehow I was the problem. Just like always. Answer the question. Susan's jaw tightened. Logan's family doesn't know about you. I blinked. What? It's complicated. No. My voice remained calm. Explain it to me. My mother looked trapped. Cornered. Not guilty. Not ashamed. Just annoyed that the conversation was happening. Finally, she exhaled heavily. Charlotte knows Madison is our daughter. And that's all she needs to know. For several seconds, I simply stared at her. Waiting for the rest. Waiting for an explanation that made sense. None came. You've been telling them you only have one child. Susan looked away. The silence answered for her. Suddenly, dozens of strange moments from the previous year snapped into place. The missing invitation. The group chats. The rehearsal dinner. The awkward conversations. The distance. None of it had been accidental. They hadn't forgotten me. They had hidden me. Deliberately. Carefully. Repeatedly. Why? The word barely came out. Susan rubbed her temples. Olivia, you live 3,000 miles away. That's not an answer. You never come home. Because nobody invites me. You always make things difficult. I laughed. Actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because the absurdity finally overwhelmed me. I paid for the wedding. I signed every contract. I flew across the country. I stood outside carrying a gift. And somehow I was the difficult one. Mom. My voice became very quiet. Did Madison know? Susan didn't answer immediately. Which told me everything. My chest tightened. She knew. Another silence. Another answer without words. For a moment, I imagined my sister discussing this plan. Knowing I was flying in. Knowing I had spent thousands of dollars. Knowing I believed I was attending her wedding. And saying nothing. The realization hurt more than my mother's betrayal. Because I expected certain things from Susan by then. I didn't expect them from Madison. Not completely. Not yet. Behind us, music began playing inside the venue. Guests started moving toward their seats. The ceremony was about to begin. Susan glanced over her shoulder. Then back at me. You need to leave now. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just leave. Like I was an inconvenience. Like I was a stranger. Like I was the problem that needed removing before the important people arrived. I looked down at the gift in my hands. A handcrafted crystal set Madison had admired months earlier during a video call. $800. Carefully chosen. Carefully wrapped. Purchased by someone she apparently didn't consider family. My throat tightened. Not because of the money. Because of the hope attached to it. The hope that maybe this trip would be different. The hope that maybe this wedding would bring us together. The hope that maybe, for once, I would matter. I slowly bent down and placed the gift beside the entrance. Then I stood. Susan visibly relaxed. She thought she had won. She thought I was leaving quietly. And she was right. But not for the reasons she imagined. Because at that exact moment, something inside me changed. The desperate need for approval. The endless effort. The constant attempts to earn a place in my own family. For the first time, I felt them slipping away. Not disappearing completely. Just weakening. Keep the gift. I said calmly. Susan nodded. Thank you. I almost laughed again. Thank you. Not sorry. Not please understand. Thank you. Like I had delivered a package. Like I had completed a transaction. Like that was all I had ever been. I turned around and walked away. Down the gravel pathway. Past the flower arrangements. Past the arriving guests. Past the beautiful wedding I helped finance but wasn't allowed to attend. Nobody stopped me. Nobody called my name. Nobody came running after me. I reached my rental car, opened the door, and sat inside. For several minutes, I didn't move. Through the venue walls, I could hear faint music beginning. The ceremony had started. Somewhere inside, Madison was walking down the aisle. My parents were smiling. Guests were applauding. Photographs were being taken. Memories were being created. And officially, according to the story they told everyone there, I didn't exist. Eventually, I started the engine. The venue disappeared behind me as I drove away. I didn't know it yet, but 3 days later, the same people who erased me from their family would be begging me for $38,000. And the answer I gave them would change everything. The drive back to the hotel felt longer than the drive to the venue. Maybe because hope had occupied the passenger seat on the way there. Now it was gone. The roads were the same. The scenery was the same. Yet everything looked different. Every mile seemed to replay the conversation outside the wedding venue. Family acquaintance. You're not invited. Leave. By the time I reached the Hampton Grove Inn, my hands were trembling. Not from anger. Not yet. Anger requires certainty. What I felt was grief. The kind that arrives when something dies that you spent years trying to keep alive. I carried the empty gift bag into my room and closed the door behind me. The silence hit immediately. No wedding music. No laughter. No speeches. Just the hum of the air conditioner and the sound of my own breathing. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. For the first time all day, I let myself cry. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Tears sliding down my face while I tried to understand how my family had reached this point. How a mother could erase her own daughter. How a father could stand there and say nothing. How a sister could allow it to happen. Eventually, exhaustion replaced emotion. Around 7 that evening, I opened my laptop. Part of me wanted distraction. Instead, I found something else. 4 emails sat in my inbox. All from wedding vendors. All addressed to me. Meadow Ridge Estate. Southern Table Catering. Bloom and Vine Floral Design. Harper Photography Group. I clicked the first email. The subject line read, "Final invoice available." My stomach tightened immediately. The venue balance alone was nearly $15,000. The caterer was over $12,000. Flowers. Photography. Decorations. Additional fees. I opened every invoice one by one. Then I did the math. $38,000. $38,000 due within 5 business days. Every contract carried the same name. Olivia Carter. Every signature belonged to me. Every financial responsibility pointed directly toward me. I leaned back slowly. Suddenly, I understood why my mother had seemed so nervous outside the venue. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was fear. Fear that I might realize something she never expected me to question. For months, they treated me like an outsider while expecting me to finance the celebration. They excluded me from planning. Excluded me from family events. Excluded me from the wedding itself. Yet somehow they still expected me to pay the bill afterward. The realization settled over me like cold water. Not because it shocked me. Because it explained everything. The missing invitation. The silence. The secrecy. They never intended for me to participate. They only intended for me to pay. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Madison. I stared at her name for several seconds before answering. Hello. Her voice sounded cheerful. Happy. Like someone enjoying the perfect wedding day. Hey, Olivia. Hi. The wedding was amazing. Of course it was. I remained silent. Everyone loved the venue. She laughed softly. Mom cried during the ceremony. Still silent. Eventually, the energy in her voice shifted slightly. Look, I heard things got awkward earlier. Awkward. The word actually made me smile. Not because it was funny. Because it was ridiculous. Being erased from your family wasn't awkward. Forgetting someone's birthday was awkward. Running into an ex at a grocery store was awkward. What happened outside that venue was something else entirely. Awkward? I repeated. You know what I mean. No. I kept my voice calm. Actually, I don't. A pause followed. Then Madison sighed. Mom thought it would be easier. Easier. There it was. The explanation. The justification. The excuse. Easier for who? She didn't answer immediately. The Reed family has certain expectations. I almost laughed. And having an older sister was somehow a problem? You don't understand. Then explain it. Silence. Long silence. Eventually, Madison changed the subject. Just like she always did when the truth became uncomfortable. Anyway, thanks for helping with all the wedding stuff. I closed my eyes. There it was. The real reason for the call. Not an apology. Not accountability. Gratitude for services rendered. You're welcome. You're the best sister. The words sounded empty. Completely empty. After we hung up, I sat alone in the hotel room replaying the conversation. Something inside me finally stopped fighting reality. For years, I had explained away behavior that should have concerned me. For years, I had accepted treatment I would never tolerate from anyone else. For years, I confused sacrifice with love. But love isn't supposed to require constant proof. Family isn't supposed to feel like an audition. Around midnight, I reopened the vendor contracts. This time I read every line carefully. Not as a sister. Not as a daughter. As the legal contract holder. And something very important became clear. The person responsible for payment was also the person authorized to approve payment. Which meant I had a choice. A real choice. For the first time in this entire situation, the power wasn't sitting with my mother. Or Madison. Or anyone else. It was sitting with me. Sunday morning, I woke up feeling strangely calm. Not happy. Not healed. Just clear. Crystal clear. I made coffee in the hotel lobby and returned to my room. Then I started making phone calls. First the venue. Then the caterer. Then the florist. Then the photographer. Every conversation followed the same pattern. Professional. Polite. Simple. My name is Olivia Carter. I'm the contract holder for yesterday's event. I am formally withdrawing payment authorization and requesting all remaining balances be redirected to the event hosts. Nobody argued. Nobody questioned me. Nobody demanded explanations. They simply noted the request and promised follow-up. 4 calls. Less than 20 minutes total. When I finished, I closed my laptop and looked out the hotel window. Somewhere across town, my family was probably opening wedding gifts. Sharing breakfast. Reliving memories from the reception. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that the $38,000 bill they expected me to quietly absorb was already on its way back to them. And for the first time all weekend, I felt something that looked a lot like peace. 3 days later, I was back in Seattle. The wedding felt like a strange dream I had finally escaped. Monday morning arrived with its usual routine. Coffee. Emails. Meetings. Deadlines. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about centerpieces, seating charts, or wedding schedules. I was thinking about work. About real life. About moving forward. Around 10:30, my phone rang. Susan Carter. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Something told me exactly why she was calling. Not because mothers suddenly develop perfect timing. Because invoices have perfect timing. I answered on the fourth ring. Hello. Olivia. My mother's voice sounded unusually bright. Suspiciously bright. How was your flight home? I almost laughed. She had not asked about my flight when I arrived. She had not asked whether I made it safely to the hotel. She had not asked if I reached Seattle after being thrown out of the wedding. Yet suddenly she cared about travel logistics. Fine. Good. A brief pause followed. Then her real reason emerged. We received some strange emails this morning. There it was. Right on schedule. What kind of emails? From the wedding vendors. I leaned back in my chair. Really? Susan's patience immediately began disappearing. Don't do that. Do what? Act confused. Her tone sharpened noticeably. The venue says payment authorization was removed. Silence. I let the words hang there. Olivia? Yes? Did you do that? The answer deserved simplicity. Yes. Complete silence followed. The kind of silence that only exists when someone genuinely believes they have misunderstood reality. What? I removed payment authorization. Why would you do that? The question actually surprised me. Not because she asked it. Because she seemed incapable of answering it herself. Mom. My voice remained calm. Do you really want me to explain? Susan exhaled sharply. This isn't funny. I know. The balances are due immediately. I know. The total is almost $38,000. I know. Each answer seemed to make her angrier. Finally, she snapped. Then what is wrong with you? I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. The question every scapegoat eventually hears. What is wrong with you? Never what happened. Never why are you hurt. Never did we make a mistake. Just what is wrong with you? You told me I wasn't invited. Silence. That has nothing to do with this. The statement stunned me. Actually stunned me. Nothing to do with this? The wedding already happened. Exactly. My voice hardened for the first time. The wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. Susan immediately shifted into defensive mode. We discussed this. No. You were making things complicated. I laughed. A short, exhausted laugh. Mom, you introduced me as a family acquaintance. More silence. Charlotte didn't need details. Details? I repeated. Being your daughter is a detail? She didn't answer. Because there was no answer. Eventually, she lowered her voice. The point is that the bills need to be paid. And there it was. Finally. The truth. Not concern. Not reconciliation. Not regret. Money. The entire conversation had been about money from the beginning. Then pay them. Susan sounded genuinely shocked. We can't. That's unfortunate. The line went completely silent. Then I heard another voice enter the conversation. My father. Richard Carter. Apparently he had been listening nearby the entire time. Put me on speaker. A moment later, his voice filled the line. Olivia. I waited. You're being unreasonable. The irony almost made me choke on my coffee. Unreasonable. Not the woman who erased her daughter from the family. Not the sister who secretly excluded her. Not the parents who expected $38,000 from someone they refused to acknowledge publicly. Me. Am I? My father sighed heavily. This isn't the time for revenge. Revenge. Another interesting word. Dad, did I cancel the wedding? No. Did I embarrass Madison? No. Did I cause a scene? Silence. No. Then explain how refusing to pay for an event I wasn't allowed to attend qualifies as revenge. Neither parent answered immediately. Because the logic was simple. Painfully simple. If I wasn't family enough to attend the wedding, I wasn't family enough to finance it. Eventually, my father changed tactics. You signed the contracts. Correct. You made a commitment. To family. Silence again. Family that told me I wasn't invited. I could practically hear their frustration growing. For years, this conversation would have ended differently. For years, guilt would have worked. Obligation would have worked. The desire for approval would have worked. Not anymore. Susan returned to the phone. Her voice sounded desperate now. What do you want? The question lingered between us. What did I want? An apology? Too late. Respect? Too late. Accountability? Maybe. But none of those things could be purchased for $38,000. I don't want anything. Then why are you doing this? I looked out my office window at the Seattle skyline. Because for the first time, I'm treating this situation exactly the way you treated me. What does that mean? If I'm not family, then this isn't my wedding bill. The silence that followed lasted nearly 15 seconds. Finally, Susan spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You're really not going to pay? For years, I would have. For years, I would have sacrificed my own dignity to keep peace. For years, I would have convinced myself that love required accepting whatever treatment people offered. Not anymore. No. The single word landed like a closing door. And on the other end of the line, for the first time since the wedding, my parents finally understood that I wasn't coming back to the role they'd assigned me. The obedient daughter. The invisible daughter. The daughter who paid the bill and disappeared. That version of Olivia Carter was gone. The phone calls started the next morning. Not one. Not two. 6 before noon. Susan called twice. My father called once. Madison called 3 times. I ignored every single one. Not because I wanted revenge. Because for the first time in years, I wanted space. Real space. The kind that allows a person to think clearly without being buried beneath guilt and manipulation. Around 1 o'clock, Madison finally sent a text message. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then another message arrived. This is getting serious. Followed by a third. Logan is furious. That one caught my attention. Not because I cared about Logan's opinion. Because I had a feeling I knew why. The vendors had probably started contacting everyone involved. The reality of $38,000 had finally arrived. And unlike me, they hadn't prepared for it. 2 hours later, curiosity got the better of me. I answered when Madison called again. She picked up before the first ring finished. Olivia. Her voice sounded strained. Exhausted. Hi, Madison. What are you doing? No greeting. No apology. Straight to the accusation. Working. You know what I mean. Actually, I don't. She exhaled sharply. The vendors are demanding payment. That tends to happen. This isn't funny. There it was again. Everyone kept insisting I was joking. As though refusing to pay $38,000 for an event I wasn't allowed to attend was somehow unreasonable. I never said it was. Madison's voice grew louder. Logan's parents are involved now. Interesting. Very interesting. Why? Silence. Then she answered reluctantly. Because they were contacted too. Suddenly, the situation became clearer. The wedding vendors weren't just pursuing my parents. They were contacting every responsible party connected to the event. Which meant Logan's family was learning details nobody intended them to learn. That sounds uncomfortable. Olivia. My sister's voice cracked slightly. Please stop. For years, I would have folded right there. The tears. The pressure. The emotional appeal. All of it used to work. Not anymore. Stop what? Punishing us. The word immediately bothered me. Punishing. Because it implied I had created the problem. Madison, who excluded me from the wedding? Silence. Who allowed Mom to tell people I was a family acquaintance? More silence. Who watched me spend money, sign contracts, and fly across the country without saying a word? Her breathing became uneven. I know you're hurt. Hurt. Such a small word for what happened. You're right. I kept my voice calm. I am hurt. Finally, for the first time during the conversation, she stopped arguing. Several seconds passed before she spoke again. Logan doesn't understand. There it was. The real issue. Not the money. Not the contracts. Logan. Understand what? Another pause. Everything. I leaned back in my chair. Then explain it to him. I can't. The answer came too quickly. Too honestly. Suddenly, I realized something important. Logan didn't know the truth. Not all of it. Maybe not even most of it. Which explained why Madison sounded terrified. Because lies work best when everyone agrees to protect them. The moment outside people become involved, the entire structure starts collapsing. Later that evening, I received a call from Aunt Evelyn. If there was one person in the family who never played favorites, it was Evelyn. She had spent years quietly observing everyone's behavior while avoiding drama whenever possible. How are you holding up? She asked. Better than expected. She laughed softly. Good. Then her tone changed. Things are getting messy back here. I wasn't surprised. What happened? Evelyn sighed heavily. Charlotte Reed found out. My pulse quickened immediately. Found out what? That you're Richard and Susan's daughter. For several seconds, I said nothing. Apparently, the truth was spreading faster than anyone expected. How? Aunt Evelyn actually laughed. Because people talk. She continued. One of the caterers called during a family brunch. Charlotte overheard enough of the conversation to start asking questions. I could already imagine it. Logan's elegant, highly organized mother suddenly discovering that a mysterious woman named Olivia Carter was financially responsible for the wedding. The same Olivia Carter she had been introduced to as a family acquaintance. What happened next? Evelyn almost sounded impressed. Charlotte started investigating. I smiled despite myself. That sounded exactly like Charlotte. And? She learned that you paid deposits. Signed contracts. Arranged vendors. My smile disappeared. Keep going. Then she learned you weren't invited. The silence that followed felt strangely satisfying. Not because anyone was suffering. Because the truth was finally operating without my help. No explanations. No arguments. No emotional speeches. Just facts. Simple, undeniable facts. Aunt Evelyn continued. Apparently Charlotte asked Susan one question in front of everyone. What question? Evelyn's voice softened. Why would your own daughter pay for a wedding she wasn't allowed to attend? I closed my eyes. Because that was the question nobody in my family could answer. Not honestly. Not publicly. Not without exposing exactly who they were. How did Mom respond? I asked. Aunt Evelyn laughed again. She didn't. For the first time since leaving the wedding venue, I felt something shift. Not victory. Not revenge. Something quieter. The truth was no longer trapped between me and my family. Other people could see it now. Other people were asking questions. And according to Aunt Evelyn, those questions were becoming impossible to avoid. Then she said something that made my heart skip a beat. Olivia. Yeah? I think Logan just learned who your family really is. The fallout accelerated faster than anyone expected. What began as a disagreement over unpaid wedding invoices quickly evolved into something much larger. Because money was never the real problem. The real problem was that people were finally asking questions. And unlike my family, those people weren't emotionally invested in protecting a carefully constructed story. 2 days after my conversation with Aunt Evelyn, Madison called again. This time, I answered immediately. Not because I wanted to talk. Because I wanted to know what had happened. The moment I picked up, I heard crying. Real crying. Not controlled tears. Not emotional persuasion. Genuine panic. Olivia. Madison struggled to breathe. Everything is falling apart. I remained silent. Logan knows. There it was. The sentence I had been expecting. Knows what? Everything. Her voice cracked. About the wedding. About you. About Mom. I walked toward my apartment window overlooking downtown Seattle. How much does he know? Enough. Madison started crying harder. His mother confronted everyone. Apparently Charlotte Reed had decided she wasn't interested in vague explanations. After learning that I was actually Richard and Susan Carter's daughter, she started asking direct questions. Why wasn't Olivia invited? Why was Olivia paying? Why was Olivia introduced as a family acquaintance? Why did nobody mention a second daughter? Every answer created new inconsistencies. Every inconsistency created new questions. Eventually, the truth became impossible to hide. According to Madison, the confrontation happened during a post-wedding family brunch. What was supposed to be a pleasant gathering turned into a disaster. Charlotte asked one question after another while Logan sat quietly listening. Susan attempted to deflect. Richard attempted to minimize. Madison attempted to change the subject. None of it worked. Then someone mentioned the vendor invoices. That was the moment everything exploded. Because once Charlotte realized $38,000 had been assigned to a daughter who wasn't even allowed to attend the wedding, the situation stopped looking like family drama. It started looking cruel. What did Logan say? I asked. Madison laughed bitterly through her tears. At first he thought there was some misunderstanding. I wasn't surprised. Most reasonable people assume misunderstandings before malice. Then Aunt Evelyn spoke. That caught my attention immediately. What did she tell him? Several seconds passed. Everything. I slowly sat down. Aunt Evelyn had spent years staying neutral. If she finally spoke, it meant she was finished protecting people. Madison continued. She told them about the rehearsal dinner. The group chats. The venue tours. The fact that everyone knew you weren't invited. Every detail made the situation worse. Not because the actions themselves were shocking. Because they demonstrated planning. Deliberate planning. Exclusion isn't an accident when it lasts an entire year. Logan left. Madison's voice barely worked. What? He walked out of the brunch. For a moment, I genuinely felt sorry for her. Not because she deserved sympathy. Because consequences often arrive differently than we expect. Did he come back? Eventually. She sniffled. But things aren't the same. Of course they weren't. Trust rarely survives revelations like that without damage. After the call ended, I spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about something Aunt Evelyn once told me. Character isn't revealed by how people treat strangers. It's revealed by how they treat family when nobody is watching. For years, my family behaved one way in public and another way in private. The wedding simply exposed the difference. The next major development arrived 3 days later. This time through Richard. My father sent an email. Not a text. Not a phone call. An email. The subject line simply read, "We need to talk." I almost deleted it without opening it. Curiosity stopped me. The message itself was surprisingly short. Olivia, things have gotten worse than you realize. Logan's family is demanding answers. Madison's marriage is under enormous strain. Vendors continue calling every day. We need to find a solution. Please call me. Love, Dad. I read the email twice. Then a third time. One sentence stood out immediately. We need to find a solution. Not we need to apologize. Not we need to take responsibility. A solution. The language of problem solving. Damage control. Crisis management. The same mindset that created the situation in the first place. I didn't respond. That evening, Aunt Evelyn called again. You saw the email? How did you know? She laughed softly. Because Richard sent nearly identical messages to half the family. That sounded about right. How bad is it? I asked. Evelyn sighed heavily. Worse than anyone expected. Apparently word had spread beyond the immediate families. Relatives started asking questions. Friends started hearing different versions of the story. Even some wedding guests learned what happened. Every retelling made Richard and Susan look worse. Not because people enjoy gossip. Because the facts were difficult to defend. One detail in particular seemed impossible for anyone to justify. Olivia paid for the wedding but wasn't allowed to attend. Every conversation eventually returned to that point. No matter how someone framed the story, it sounded wrong. Deeply wrong. What about Charlotte? I asked. Evelyn actually laughed. She's furious. That answer didn't surprise me. Charlotte Reed struck me as the kind of woman who valued honesty, structure, and reputation. Discovering that her family had been pulled into deception probably felt like a personal insult. And Logan? A longer pause followed. I think he's questioning more than the wedding. Those words lingered in my mind long after the conversation ended. Because marriages don't begin with trust magically installed. They begin with choices. Honesty. Transparency. Integrity. And from Logan's perspective, his new wife had just revealed a side of herself he never knew existed. Meanwhile, back in Tennessee, the bills kept arriving. The venue wanted payment. The florist wanted payment. The photographer wanted payment. Everyone wanted payment. And for the first time in their lives, my parents couldn't simply hand responsibility to me and expect it to disappear. Then, late Friday afternoon, my phone vibrated again. Another email from Richard. This one was different. Much shorter. Much simpler. Only a single sentence. Olivia, I think we've made a terrible mistake. Reading those words, I realized something important. The $38,000 was never the real cost of the wedding. The real cost was the truth. And my family was finally starting to understand how expensive that truth had become. The email sat unread in my inbox for almost an entire day before I opened it again. Olivia, I think we've made a terrible mistake. For years, those were the words I wanted to hear. Not because they would erase the pain. Because they would acknowledge it. Recognition matters. Especially when someone spends years pretending your hurt doesn't exist. Yet when I finally received those words, they didn't feel the way I imagined. There was no sense of victory. No satisfaction. No triumphant moment where everything suddenly became worth it. There was only sadness. Sadness for what had been lost. Sadness for the years nobody could get back. Sadness for a family that spent so long protecting appearances that they forgot how to protect each other. 2 weeks later, I received another email. This time, it wasn't from my father. It was from Logan Reed. The message surprised me enough that I opened it immediately. Olivia, you don't owe me a response, but I wanted to apologize. I should have asked more questions. I should have paid attention when things didn't make sense. What happened to you was wrong. I am sorry. The email continued for several paragraphs. Logan explained that he had spent days piecing together the full story. He spoke with Aunt Evelyn. He reviewed messages. He confronted Madison. Eventually, he reached a conclusion I had reached years earlier. The problem wasn't one bad decision. It was a pattern. A pattern of favoritism. A pattern of exclusion. A pattern that nobody challenged until the wedding exposed it publicly. The final line stayed with me. Sometimes the people who tell the truth become inconvenient to those who benefit from lies. I never replied. Not because I was angry. Because some conversations don't need responses. Sometimes acknowledgement is enough. As summer turned into fall, life gradually settled. The wedding vendors eventually worked out payment arrangements with the actual hosts of the event. It wasn't easy. It wasn't pleasant. But it happened. The $38,000 problem that everyone expected me to solve became their responsibility instead. Exactly where it belonged. Madison and Logan remained married, although according to Aunt Evelyn, the first year was difficult. Trust had been damaged. Not destroyed. Damaged. There is a difference. My father continued sending occasional emails. At first, they focused on practical matters. Then they became more personal. Small memories. Small apologies. Small attempts to rebuild something neither of us fully understood anymore. My mother never changed quite as much. That realization hurt, but it wasn't surprising. Some people can admit mistakes. Others can only admit consequences. Susan belonged to the second group. She regretted the fallout. She regretted the embarrassment. Whether she truly regretted the behavior itself remained unclear. And honestly, I stopped needing an answer. Because one of the most important lessons I learned from the entire experience was that closure doesn't always arrive from other people. Sometimes it arrives when you stop waiting. About 6 months after the wedding, I started working with a therapist. Not because I was falling apart. Because I wanted to understand why I spent so many years accepting treatment that would have been unacceptable from anyone else. The answer wasn't simple. It never is. Love. Obligation. Hope. Family expectations. Fear of rejection. All of them played a role. During one session, my therapist asked a question that completely changed my perspective. If a friend told you this story, what would you advise her to do? The answer came instantly. Set boundaries. Protect herself. Stop confusing sacrifice with love. Then my therapist smiled gently. Why does everyone deserve that advice except you? That question stayed with me for weeks. Maybe because I didn't have a good answer. For most of my life, I believed being a good daughter meant endless accommodation. Endless forgiveness. Endless patience. The wedding taught me something different. Being a good person does not require accepting disrespect. Compassion and boundaries can exist at the same time. Forgiveness and accountability can exist at the same time. Love and self-respect can exist at the same time. A year after the wedding, I received an invitation in the mail. Not a wedding invitation. A Thanksgiving invitation. Richard Carter. Susan Carter. My parents. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. No excuses. No explanations. No requests. Just a simple message. We would love to see you if you're willing. If not, we understand. Love, Mom and Dad. I attended. Not because everything was fixed. Because healing requires opportunities. When I arrived, nobody pretended the past didn't happen. Nobody asked me to move on. Nobody told me I was overreacting. For the first time in years, honesty occupied the room. Madison apologized. Again. My father apologized. Again. My mother tried in her own imperfect way. It wasn't a movie ending. There were no dramatic speeches. No miraculous reconciliation. Real life rarely works that way. Relationships heal gradually. Trust returns slowly. Some scars never disappear completely. But that Thanksgiving felt different. Not because my family finally became perfect. Because I finally stopped needing them to be. Looking back now, people always focus on the money. The $38,000. The wedding invoices. The contracts. The financial consequences. But those details were never the real story. The real story was about value. For years, my family valued what I could provide more than who I was. Reliability. Stability. Help. Resources. The wedding exposed that truth in a way nobody could ignore. Then it gave me an opportunity to make a choice. Not a choice about money. A choice about myself. Would I continue accepting a role that diminished me? Or would I finally establish boundaries? The answer changed my life. My parents said I wasn't invited to my sister's wedding. 3 days later, they begged me to pay $38,000. I said no. Not because I wanted revenge. Because for the first time, I understood something I wish I had learned years earlier. Love without respect isn't love. Family without accountability isn't family. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to keep paying for a place at a table that never intended to save you a seat. The moment I stopped funding their version of me was the moment I finally became myself. And that was worth far more than $38,000.